Hi, my name is Lily and welcome back to my channel and welcome to my January wrap up. So I read, I think it was 24 books in January? Let me go check. So I read 23 books in January and I won't be talking about all of them. I got a bit of a hyperfixation on some Kindle Unlimited steamy romances that the internet just doesn't need to know about. But I will be talking to you about the ones I feel comfortable talking about and of course the ones that I really loved. So without further ado, I'm going to get straight into it because it's a lot of books to talk about and I am really excited. So the first book, I think I actually read this as an audiobook, but I do have a physical copy, and that is The Comfort Book by Matt Haig. This is a non-fiction. Matt Haig isn't quite well known for his literary fiction like The Midnight Library, which often have magical realism elements to them, but he has also written some non-fiction around the topics of mental health, as he has always been very vocal about his own mental health journey. So The Comfort Book is kind of like his collection of things that he finds comforting that help him get through darker days and more difficult days, and it's a real mixture of thoughts, feelings, suggestions, a couple of recipes. I listened to the audiobook as I said, and it is read by the author, so that was really nice because I feel like you really get to know exactly what he meant by all of the words and all of the suggestions. Sorry, the lighting is just constantly changing today. I've been waiting for a good lighting moment and it's just not happening, so we're gonna roll with it. But anyway, this is just a really simple collection of thoughts and feelings and suggestions for him. I think this will be best for people who align quite a lot with how he views the world and how he sees mental health, because everyone sees it and approaches it differently, and some things work for others that really don't work for other people. And so it's one of those ones I would say take with a pinch of salt. If you have read some of the other non-fiction works around mental health and you've enjoyed those, you'll probably enjoy this, but it isn't one that I would say everybody's going to enjoy. And I did like the audiobook. I think I rated this one 4 stars because I thought that some of the elements felt a bit odd, misplaced, and it felt kind of like jumping around, like the recipes I wasn't a huge fan of, but in general it is quite a good read. And yeah, if you like Matt Haig's mental health perspective, then this is a really good one to pick up. Next, I read Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a difficult one because I gave it 3 stars, not because I thought it was bad, but just because it wasn't quite for me. I listened to the audiobook and I think that it would have been better if I hadn't. I think if I'd read it physically, I would have enjoyed it more. I did read another Emily Henry book later on in the month and I read that physically and I enjoyed that more, as I'll talk about later. So I think it's one of those where it didn't lend itself so much to audiobook, but also I just found that I wasn't connecting with the romance between the characters. So Beach Read is about 2 authors. One is a romance author, she's a woman, and then you have a male literary fiction author who went to the same like creative writing courses in college, and so they know each other. And they're both successful and they're both on deadline for their next book. And they end up in these holiday homes nearby to each other. I think the female main character is dealing with some grief at the time, and the male main character is kind of struggling as well, and they kind of bond over something and they decide to swap genres, and so she's going to try and write literary fiction and he's going to try and write a romance novel, and whoever publishes it first wins. It's kind of the idea. But of course then they have to teach each other how to write their genres, and so they spend time with each other every week talking about their genres, going on research trips and things like that. And it's about a slight enemies to lovers progression, because they're not really enemies, they're just kind of, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's kind of a grumpy pairing, I would describe. I just wasn't that invested in the main couple. I thought it was a good setup, I liked the idea, I liked the setting, a lot of the side characters were really fun, but I just wasn't completely sold on the main couple. But I would recommend it if you like romance, and it's quite low-ish spice for like spicy romances, I guess. It's not very spicy. There's a couple of sex scenes, but it's not hugely explicit. It's not the main focus of the book. So if that's what you like in a romance, then that is definitely one to consider. As you can tell, I had a bit of an audiobook boom at the beginning of January because the next book I read was another audiobook, and that was Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. I think this is my first Tessa Bailey? No, I think it's my second Tessa Bailey actually, because I think I read It Happened One Summer in 2021. Yeah, so this is like my second Tessa Bailey. The first one I thought was okay, but I didn't love. Fix Her Up I definitely enjoyed more. So Fix Her Up is the first book in the Hot and Hammered series. I gave it 4 stars. This is about 2 people who've known each other since childhood. The male main character is a baseball star who is injured, and I think he basically doesn't really play anymore. He's injured and he can't get playing. I'm not sure, I can't really remember, it's a while ago now. And then we have the female main character, who is his best friend's younger sister, who has had a crush on him for years. And basically, because he can't play baseball anymore, he's really depressed and kind of acting like a bit of a grouch. And so she tries to break him out of this, and somewhere along the line they decide to agree to fake date so that he could improve his reputation, so that he can try and get a job as a commentator, presenter, kind of host thing to commentate on baseball in the upcoming season. And obviously things happen when they fake date. So someone once said to me that Tessa Bailey books are kind of 50% spice and 50% plot, and I would say that's fairly accurate for this one at least. And there is a lot of spice, so if you're not a big fan of spicing your books, I would avoid Tessa Bailey books altogether, because they are pretty spicy and it is a fairly major theme in the book. So this is definitely a Grumpy Sunshine pairing, which I love. I love Grumpy Sunshine books. And this is just so sweet because there's a really good side plot going on in that a lot of the women in the town feel kind of like they don't have that collection around them, they don't have a community, so they form the Just Us League. So it is a group of women who come together, and it's organised by our main character, her sister and their friend, and they host all these meetings with women and they try to support each other with their endeavours. And I just think that was a really lovely side plot. I loved it. And what I enjoy about Tessa Bailey books is the female characters aren't just there to woo the man, they have their own agency, they're doing their own things, and that very much happens in this book. The things I didn't like, so it didn't get 5 stars, was the main character's profession is she's a clown, which is completely legitimate, but when it's brought up as often as it is in like spicy scenes, it's quite off-putting. Like it just wasn't for me. If other people like that, then fair enough, but for me it just felt a bit icky. And yes, it is brought up a couple of times during spicy scenes, which just was a no for me. And then the other part as well is that Tessa Bailey likes the word flesh a lot. And it just is really off-putting for me. I don't want to hear the word flesh that much. It's just, flesh to me is like when you're dealing with meat for cooking, or like dead bodies, or you know, it's not sexy. Tessa Bailey, please stop using that word. And I also found it like, I don't know, I don't really enjoy when they have scenes where it just feels like it's not fair to other people around them. Like, I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's like back of the limo scenes where the limo driver can definitely hear you, you know, and people aren't consenting to that, you know. If it's a kink book, then I guess you can kind of look past it because it's meant to be the book, but these aren't kink books, these are just regular romances, and it just feels very much like these people aren't consenting. I wouldn't encourage this kind of activity in your readers. It made me a little bit uncomfortable at times, but it wasn't like anything major. It just was a personal thing. I'm not a big fan of that in books where non-consenting people are sort of overhearing what's going on, and that is quite common in Tessa Bailey's books, I find, but especially in this one. The other one I read this month, or the other 2 that I read this month, is not particularly like that, but this first one was definitely quite a few times where I was just like, you are not in the right place for this. Next, I read The Roommate by Rosie Dunnan. I absolutely love this one. I gave it 5 stars. I listened to the audiobook and would highly recommend. It was a very good audiobook. This one is about a woman who decides that she wants a fresh start, I think. So she goes to LA to go and stay with her childhood friend who she's always had a crush on. He's in a band, he's fairly famous. When she arrives, she finds out that he and his band have been invited on a surprise tour, and so he's not actually going to be staying with her, and he's rented out his room to a random guy he found on Craigslist, which obviously does not impress her. But she decides to stick with it because she doesn't want to look like a failure and go back to her family, so she decides to just move in with this random guy from Craigslist, and it turns out that he is a porn star. And this book is actually much more wholesome than you'd think it'd be. So she develops a crush on the porn star roommate, the roommate develops a crush on her, and there's a lot of, I don't know, it just is actually surprisingly wholesome. There's a lot of like showing her that men can be better to be with than she thinks, teaching her things, but also what I really enjoyed was there's a side plot of creating a business about centering on women and women's pleasure and education. It was a very sex positive feminist romance, and I really, really enjoyed that. I felt really invested in the couple. They were just so sweet and so wholesome together, and I really loved how they balanced each other out really well. Next, I read The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren, again another audiobook. This is a romance that is fairly low spice. Like, it's not fade to black spice scenes, but it is very, very vague. Like, you don't really know what's happening and it's not described at all. So if you don't like really graphic spicy scenes, this is one for you. This one is about an app that has been developed that is supposed to, once you give your DNA over, calculate the percentage match you are with people. And there's different levels of matches, and depending on the percentage match you get is what the odds are of you staying together long term. And basically there's this thing called the diamond match, which is when you're above 80 or 90% matching or something like that. And those are very, very rare. They've only had like one diamond match ever, or less than 5, I think it is, and it's incredibly rare. This young woman and her friend meet the developer of the app by chance, and he basically offers to let them be part of the trial run for it and enter. And she is a single mum, hasn't really been dating, so she kind of is like, oh, why not, let me give it a go. And she finds out that she is a diamond match with the CEO. So obviously this is amazing news for the business, so they convince her to try and date him and go on all these PR stunts and stuff so that they can promote the app. So they kind of have to fake date, but not fake date. Like, they are trying to give it a go, but at the same time they have to kind of act it up for the cameras. And it is just like a really nice romance. It is lovely to see this couple blossom and bloom, and I loved seeing the male main character with our female main character's daughter. Those interactions were just so sweet, but for me there just was something missing. Like, it just wasn't quite a 5-star read for me, but I did really enjoy it. My next read was The Fine Print by Lauren Asher. This was an ebook, it's a Kindle Unlimited book, and this was recommended to me on TikTok, not personally, but like it kept coming up my TikTok, so I decided to give it a go. This is like a Disneyland, what do they call it? Like a Disneyland spoof romance, and it is about the CEO of Disneyland has passed away. Well, not Disneyland, I can't remember what they call it in the book, but it's basically Disneyland. The CEO of this theme park has passed away. To inherit the business, his 3 grandsons have to like complete a task. The grandson we focus on in this book, his task is to come up with and foster an idea with the creation team at the park that will revolutionise the park within 6 months. And then we have our female main character. She has been kind of like raised in the park because both of her parents live there and the staff get housing like basically in the park. And so she's worked there her whole sort of adult life as well. She works in the like princess parlour where she does make makeup for small children, and basically she submits by accident to this competition that the grandson sets up a proposal, but the proposal for this amazing idea is actually her just trashing on the ride that is supposed to be opening soon that they've spent loads of money on, because that ride was actually her idea but it was stolen from her by an ex-boyfriend and he changed it and she thinks he made it worse. The CEO's grandson sees this and he thinks she has a really great brain. Basically he thinks she's really creative, so he offers her an opportunity to be part of the creative team that develops the park, because he thinks that she is his bet for winning this competition basically. And yeah, it is about their romance, and it's about him trying to keep it professional whilst also realising he has a crush on her trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and it is just so good. It is really pure at times but also really hot. And then you have the female main character's younger sister who has Down syndrome, and she is such a great side character in this book because she just gets involved in everything. She's so sneaky. She definitely is trying to get the 2 characters to get together, and I just love her. She's got so much personality, such great little moments with her. She was honestly my favourite character, and I love that she was included not as a like poor disabled child but as like a legitimate fully rounded invested character who impacted the storyline, which is quite unusual in romance, and I just loved it. The reason I didn't give it 5 stars was because honestly, like, I compared it a little bit to 50 Shades, like in the sense of in those movies, at least, I haven't read the books, but in the movies he very much just kind of like takes her on dates without asking her first and just kind of like whisks her off, and it's like a severe lack of consent. And I feel like there was that element in this. It definitely felt like the vanilla version of 50 Shades at times, where he was just like, I'm a billionaire, I'm gonna take you on this date. She didn't really have a choice, and I didn't like that. I felt a bit more like he should have asked more than just taken. But yeah, maybe that's just me thinking about it too much, but it did take away a little bit from the story for me. Now we're gonna skip a whole bunch of books I don't want to talk about. The next book I do want to talk about is The Roommate Risk by Talia Hibbert. This is another romance. Again, I basically only read romances this month, and this one, I can't remember what I rated it. Let me go check. So I gave this one 5 stars, and I think it deserved it. It was really good. So this is a friends to lovers romance, and it's about 2 characters who meet during university, and they're best friends during university, and they have one hookup, and basically the female main character says to him, I don't stay friends with people I hook up with, so either we keep hooking up or we stay just friends and never hook up again. And he decides that he really, really likes her and just wants to keep her in his life, so they become friends, and they actually become best friends. And that's kind of all in the past. And this has been simmering for like many, many years at this point. And then the female main character is living with a friend in a flat, and her room gets flooded and she needs to find somewhere to stay. Her dad isn't living in the country at the moment, so she asks her male best friend if she can move in with him for a bit while her room is repaired. And so it is a really good friends to lovers romance, because you can see from the male's perspective that he is just completely besotted. He loves her, he really wants to be with her, but he's convinced she doesn't want to be with him, and she's just kind of figuring out whether or not she can handle a relationship and whether she wants to try with him or if it's worth risking their friendship. And it's just so good. It was so good. Like, the spicy scenes were really good, but the wholesome scenes were even better. Like, seeing them look after each other and seeing how well they knew each other was just, it was just so precious. I just loved them so much, and I shipped them so hard. And you do get some flashbacks to their past, which I'm not a big fan of jumping timelines, we know this, but the present scenes were just so good that I couldn't rate it any lower than a 5 stars. Like, it was such a good, slow burn, well thought out friends to lovers progression. Yeah, really loved it. Then I read A Girl Like Her by Talia Hibbert, which is a separate book in a different series. I think The Roommate Risk might be a standalone, or it's the first in a different series. A Girl Like Her is the first in a series, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's the first in another series. But I don't really tend to read Talia Hibbert's books in series order because they don't link very much to each other. This is obviously another romance. This is set in a small town in England, and basically you have the main character is autistic. She used to date this guy in the town who is kind of like the apple of the town's eye, but he always kept her a secret. When he dumped her to marry someone else, something happened, we're not entirely sure what happened, but something went down, and she is now like the town's pariah, and she's also known as like the town slut. And so she's got this really bad reputation. She doesn't really leave the house. She writes a webcomic, so she doesn't have to leave the house. She does everything at home and she basically lives off of like instant noodles. And then you have this guy who is new to town. He is coming from the army and he has a lot of trauma, but also he just has this need to look after people. His parents are no longer in the picture, they're either dead or they left, and he basically moves in next door to our female main character, and he can see that she just needs a little bit of help, and he wants to be there for her. He loves talking to her, they're really good friends, so he starts cooking her dinners and bringing them around to her, and they form a friendship that starts to blossom into more from that. And I just loved how wholesome this is, because we have the autistic female main character who is very much herself. She's always in her pajamas, she is very much into her special interest, and it's just a thing. And our male main character really loves her for it and not despite it, and he is definitely willing to work with what she needs and like what she wants from him. And I just thought it was really well written in that sense. It's an own voices book. Talia Hibbert is autistic, but that doesn't always guarantee good rep, but I thought the rep in this was really good and I really enjoyed reading it. It can be a little triggering at times because there is a lot of hate towards neurodivergent people in this book, but if you can handle that, it is so worth it. The romance is just awesome. Next, I read Times Like These by Julia Wolfe. This is a rockstar romance. It's the first book in a series, but I don't intend to reading the rest of the series. So this was another 5-star read for me, and I just loved it. I am a big fan of rockstar romances, but I just don't think they always are done right, but this one was done really well. Basically, this is about a girl who doesn't really know this band at all, but her sister loves them, and so she decides to go to a concert with her sister because her sister loves them so much. But when they're at the concert, one of the members of the band faints, and she thinks that he's passed out because he's drunk. So she has filmed this, sort of didn't intentionally film it, she was filming just to film, but she captured that moment and she posts it on Twitter and says, makes some kind of caption about him being too drunk. And the frontman of the band sees this and he retweets it and basically slams her for it and says, you know, actually he was really sick and he ended up in hospital. And it causes a lot of fuss. She gets people who figure out where she is, where she works, and turning up at her work, and she gets fired from her job because of this, and it all just kind of kicks off. And then she gets a message from the band's account from the guy that actually passed out, reaching out to her, saying that he's really sorry for what happened because he knows that this must have affected her, and asks her to come to a meeting. And at that meeting she tells them that she's lost her job, that things are not great, and basically she ends up being offered a job to be kind of like a roadie for the band, but helping out their manager. And she really doesn't get on with the lead singer. He thinks that she's just horrible because of what she tweeted. She thinks he's horrible because of how he responded. And so it is just a strong enemies to lovers romance, but with lots of friendship building in between as well that I really enjoyed, and there's lots of tension and passion between them that I loved. And what I liked about this book as well is our female main character. She's not super skinny, like she's frequently described as curvy, but also that she's really strong and independent. She has her own business where she can build websites for people and design websites, and that's like what she wants to do, and she is kind of successful in that on the side, but also she is helping out the manager and she does an amazing job of it, and it's just really good. I love seeing that kind of representation. I love them together. I thought they were a really well-matched couple once they started to get together, and I really believed in the romance, and I liked the side characters. I liked how there's a lot of nuance in this book. Then I read The Cat Who Saved Books by Suzuki Natsukawa. This is translated from Japanese. It's kind of literary fiction mixed with magical realism. I would liken it to kind of like The Midnight Library, I guess, that kind of level of literary fiction. I rated this one 3 stars. This one is about a boy who lives with his grandfather in Japan. I think he lives in Tokyo, but I'm not sure. And they run a secondhand bookshop together, but his grandfather has passed away. And basically the bookshop's going to have to close, and he's moving in with this distant aunt that he didn't know. And while he's kind of preparing for that, he's not going to school because he's trying to keep the shop open for as long as he can before he has to move. And this ginger cat appears one day and says that he needs him to help rescue books, and so they go on these adventures to rescue books from people who are mistreating them. And it sounds so much more magical than it is. Like, it starts off really whimsical and magical, and I really loved it at first, but then it just kind of took a turn for me that I didn't like. It gets quite reader elitist, where there's portions where people are criticised for not reading the correct kind of books, like popular books are not good books anymore, and people don't publish real literature anymore. And like real literature, I'm talking about like ancient philosophers is the kind of books that this kid thinks is good books. Like, he only reads classics, and those are the only right books from the perspective of the writer. And I just didn't like that, and I didn't like that people were being told they were wrong for reading books in the way that they like to read the books. And you know, these people in the books who are mistreating books, they are taking it to an extreme, but I just didn't like the message of, like, it was portraying there was only one right way to enjoy and read books, only one kind of book you're supposed to read. That kind of tainted it for me. But I do still recommend it if you're interested, because I feel like different people will read it differently and get different takes from it. So I didn't love it, but I feel like it could be really good for someone else. Next I read Sadie, and I really hated it. I listened to the audiobook. This was really big a few years ago on BookTube, and I don't understand why. I hated it so much. So Sadie is about 2 sisters. The younger sister was murdered and the older sister disappeared. Separate events. And it is about a podcaster who has found out about this, who is trying to track down the older sister, Sadie. But you also get portions from Sadie's perspective when she went missing and what she did. Because they know she ran away, but they don't know what happened to her after she ran away. So from Sadie's perspective, you see her going on this road trip to avenge her sister's death, but you don't really know what her goal is. You don't really know what she's doing other than she is looking for someone. and the podcaster in present day is trying to find out and piece together what happened. And honestly, this book just was so boring. Like, nothing happens for most of the book. We get sent in circles a lot, and what I didn't enjoy was like having both Sadie and the podcaster's perspectives was completely pointless, because you'd always get Sadie's perspective first. So Sadie would tell you what she did and what happened, and then you'd get the podcaster's perspective being like, oh, and then I went to this motel and I spoke to the clerk, and you find out the exact same information Sadie just told you in her portion. And it just is like, what's the point? Like, cut the book in half and just give me Sadie's perspective, thanks. Or just give me the podcaster's perspective, you know? Like, it just didn't work. Like, it's just repeating the same information, but in different voices, and I didn't like that. And I just found it really dull. Like, it was so obvious. Like, I was waiting for the big twist because everyone's like, oh, it's so shocking, like, so many twists in this book. And I was reading it thinking, like, so when's the twist coming? And then I realised I'd already had the twist, and I wasn't supposed to have predicted that twist from like page 5, but I did. Like, I just thought it was really obvious. Like, there was only one, once you like knew the premise of this book, there was only one direction that it could go. Like, there's a reason she's looking for one specific man. What do we think this one specific man might have done? Was that not obvious to everyone? Like, I just don't know how anyone couldn't have predicted that. Like, it was so obvious. And then the ending, I'm not going to spoil it, but it's the most infuriating ending. Like, you put me through all of that book for nothing. I know. I just hated it. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I don't understand why it's popular. I don't think it deserved to blow up. Honestly, don't think it should have been published. I think it's terrible. Like, I just think she needed to rework that whole thing to make it more exciting. Like, the premise was interesting, but it was poorly executed for me. Then I read my second Emily Henry book, which was You and Me on Vacation. I read this one physically, but I don't have the copy because I've already lent it out. Now, this one I still only gave 3 stars, but I still say I enjoyed it more than Beach Read, and I was more invested in the characters in this book. This one is about 2 best friends who met during college, and on the blurb it says they like hated each other when they first met, but that is not the vibe when you read it, honestly. They just weren't like well matched when they first met, but they bonded eventually, and they find out they are from the same town, same hometown, so they like drive back to home for the holidays together, and that's where they bond. And basically they come up with this agreement where every summer they all go on a trip together, just the 2 of them. And then the female main character actually becomes a travel blogger and works for a big travel magazine or website, and starts getting free trips that they go on together. And basically they then, for some reason you don't know yet, cut contact for 2 years, and the travel blogger is realising that she is not fulfilled in life and she needs to find a new direction, and she really misses her friend. So she decides to reconnect with him and asks to go on a trip, and basically they end up going on a trip together to, I think it's Los Angeles or somewhere nearby, no, somewhere near LA, where they will then afterwards go to one of his brother's weddings. And they are super close, or they were super close with each other's families back in the day, so like that's completely fine. So you get the present day storyline of them reconnecting and going on this trip together, but then you also get flashbacks to their previous trips over the like last 10 years. And I really enjoyed the present day. I loved seeing them reconnect and discovering what happened and seeing each other as human beings. I didn't really love the flashback scenes. I found it really confusing, and honestly you just don't see much character development over 10 years. I always find that with these books have loads of flashbacks, is that the characterization doesn't change. They stay the same, and nobody stays the same over 10 years. Nobody does, but characters in books do apparently. Yeah, I just found the reason I didn't give this 5 stars is all of the character progression happens in the last like 30 pages of the book, where they suddenly realise they were being dicks to each other, and you're just like, surely we could have had a little bit more growth before that point, but apparently not. But still, it's a fun read, and if you liked Emily Henry's previous books, then I would still recommend you read it. And yeah, it's again quite low-ish on spice. This one's a bit more graphic, I think, but there's less of it than Beach Read, but still it's not a super spicy book, so if you don't want a book that's mostly spice, Emily Henry romances are the way to go. Then we had Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey, which is the 2nd book in the Hot Mohammed series. This one is about a couple who have been married for like 10 years, I think, but their marriage is on the rocks because basically like they just don't interact anymore, and the wife decides to leave and move out because the husband basically doesn't even acknowledge her when she comes home from work, and she really wants to follow her dreams of opening up a restaurant, but he's never really been supportive of that. And basically he then says to her like he'll do anything to have her back, so she decides to really test that and says like let's go to marriage counselling, and she finds the most obnoxious marriage counsellor she can, thinking that he will just give up, but he doesn't. And so it's about their process of reconnecting through this marriage counselling and seeing them grow together again and making efforts with each other, and I honestly loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I don't usually like second chance romances, but I felt like this one was really well done, because you could really see how they drifted apart and see the effort they were making to get back together again. Like usually second chance romance is just like, you know, like the road trip where they just go on a road trip together and magically they're supposed to have healed in the time that they've been apart, whereas this one, they go to therapy and they actually try to reconnect and try to rebuild their relationship, and I really enjoyed reading that. And I just love seeing it from both their perspectives of how invested and not invested they were, if you get what I mean. It was a very different read and I really enjoyed it. It's steamier than you would expect for a second chance romance, but it was really good. So yeah, would recommend that one. And then I read the final book in the Hot Unhammered series, which was Tools of Engagement, and that's again by Tessa Bailey. This one is about the sister of the clown from the first book in the series, who basically has not really had proper relationships that have worked out very well, and has also never been taken seriously by her family properly. And basically her family owns a construction and renovation business, and she's always been the person that goes in and does the interior design at the end, but she has always wanted to lead a flip from start to finish, but they won't take her seriously and won't let her. And she decides to start a flip by herself. A reality TV channel finds out about this and decides to start this competition series where she goes up against her brother to renovate houses, and whoever renovates the house the best wins. And so they have 2 separate houses they've got to renovate, but only one person volunteers to be on her construction crew from the original crew, and that is this guy Wes, who she hates. He is a new guy in town from Texas. He really gives her back all the shit she tries to give out to everyone, and she doesn't appreciate that. But there's a real kind of enemies to lovers romance about it. But also Wes is new to town because his sister has asked him to come and look after her daughter while she tries to sort her life out. So he is in his early 20s and trying to look after a 5-year-old child, and he doesn't really know what he's doing. And Rosie's Just Us League decides to come together to help him raise his daughter. So it's just such a sweet book. You can see them both so insecure in different ways and working together to sort of become stronger, become a better couple together, and to become better individuals, and it is just a really good book. I did give it 4 stars. I can't quite remember why it didn't hit the 5-star mark, but it's still one that I would highly recommend. Honestly, this whole series I really enjoyed, would recommend. I enjoyed it a lot more than It Happened One Summer, but would still also recommend that book. But yeah, but again, these ones are quite heavy on the spice at times, so if you're not into super spicy romances, I wouldn't recommend it. So that was actually the final book that I read in January. So yes, 23 books, and I hope you enjoyed the ones I talked to you about. Yeah, so I basically just spent a lot of time reading. I hyper-focused a lot on things and hyper-fixated on certain tropes, and so I read a lot more than I usually do, but I'm trying to keep this energy up because I really enjoyed reading that many. Some people say that they don't think you can enjoy books if you read them at that fast, but I really did. So I don't care. So let me know down in the comments how many books you read in January, what were your favourites. I'd love to hear about it. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. All of my social media links are down in the description below. If you want to leave me a comment to let me know you're here, leave me a cat emoji in the comments. So thank you again. Bye.